Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. The next 10 minutes are inspired by a film and an article. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the engine. I didn't do a lot of research before I started this podcast, and please don't laugh at that. I'm doing my best, but I don't I don't research things to death. I know people get analysis paralysis, and it's just not my jam. I've never been the type of person who sits down, puts a pen and paper to something, and then just thinks about it for days and days and months and sometimes years. I have friends in all aspects of my life who I know are just kind of thinkers and planners, and they don't really execute. That's not a judgment on them. By the way, let me be really clear. I'm not saying those people are bad, but what I am saying is they don't execute. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's fine if they don't. But again, it's not my jam. Recently, however, I was talking to a friend, and he's a big fan of the podcast, which I love. Thank you. And he was saying, "Look, you have some really good content. You got to get more likes. You got to get more reviews. You got to get other things because I really like the way your podcast is going. I love the ideas. I love the interviews." And again, he's a big fan, very complimentary. And I said, "Okay, well, like I don't really put a lot of thought into how I was going to market this. What does that look like?" So he sends me a couple articles. Now, the articles were both written by relatively famous podcasters, not Joe Rogan, but very, very popular. Thousands and thousands of, 5-star reviews. And one guy, I think, even got like podcast of the year on a specific um, podcast service. These are really serious guys. So I start reading them. I'm like, oh, well, I certainly have something to learn from them. I get through the two articles, and they were incredibly lengthy. And I told my friend, I was like, you know what this is? This is an article for someone who likes thinking about doing a podcast. And he said, "Oh, so you have all the answers?" I said, "Absolutely not. I took notes while I went through this. 100% I took notes." But it, to me, was kind of like a scene from Zoolander. Now, if you've never seen Zoolander, I highly, highly recommend it. Zoolander's a fantastic film. And it's all about this male model who's absolutely ridiculous. He's just the world's biggest idiot. And at one point, he's kind of having like a crisis of identity and decides that he wants to start the Derek Zoolander School for kids who want to read good, learn how to read, and do other things good too. That's his whole center. So at one point, the antagonist Mugatu, who's this evil fashion designer, presents him with this little model of the Derek Zoolander School, blah blah blah. So Derek gets upset because it's too small, and he goes home at one point and tells his friends that he wants to make the center, and just thinking about making the center was the most meaningful thing he had ever done in his life. And I laughed about it. I mean, it's always a great line. It's like, and just thinking about it, it's the best thing, the most meaningful thing ever. And they're like, "Great, Derek." Well, it turns out there's a lot of merit to that. It turns out nonprofits are very attuned to this concept, not the concept of the Derek Zoolander Center, but attuned to getting people to have a dopamine rush when they think about helping someone. So if a nonprofit gets you on the phone, if you're like call center or NPR or PBS or whatever it is, they have the calls that come in, right? And they have the annual fundraisers, and they'll call people, or you can call in and donate. And they know that if they don't get you to donate while they have you on the phone, going hard about all of the benefits and all of the great things you're doing and all of this stuff, if they don't catch you in that moment, when you have the greatest sense of satisfaction, again, let's be clear, you have the greatest satisfaction thinking about doing this, they're never going to catch you. Because the second you hang up the phone, the sense of satisfaction is gone. And the second you donate, yeah, you feel okay, but it's nowhere near the sense of anticipation and satisfaction you got when you were going to donate. It's a very odd thing. It's a very odd psychological thing. And that's kind of what was going on in Zoolander. He's saying, like, just thinking about doing this thing was the most meaningful thing I've ever done. And he's probably right, because to start a center where you educate students, that is a long, horrendous process. And very rarely would you get to the point where you had, this big win. I mean, yeah, sometimes they have, annual fundraiser and everybody's so happy. And I've been to a couple things like that, and it's a real feel-good thing. But it's a really arduous endeavor to get any kind of nonprofit like that going. This is what kind of happens. And this is why I think these lengthy, elaborate articles are written about making podcasts or anything else. And I say this, and I have this criticism, because the podcasts we're talking about, one of the first or second things was talking about monetizing your podcast. And then it got into the nitty-gritty of acquiring advertisers and how you acquire them and what pay you should be getting for them and how many you want, how many you don't want. All these little philosophical points. If I'm not excited about the product, I don't really care. I got to be behind it. All of these things. And they were talking about how much money you get per 1,000 downloads of an episode. They're like, you can get $25 to $100 per 1,000. So if you're getting 50,000 downloads an episode, blah, 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 back and forth. Now look, I've not been doing this that long. So let me be clear. I am no expert on podcasting. But I also don't think my podcast is that bad. I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying it's not like a D. To get 50,000 downloads on an episode would be so astronomically out of my league. It's laughable. And I am someone who executed. Okay? To get even 10,000 downloads per episode would be unthinkable at this point. And I post 6 to 7 episodes a week. And they're, in my mind, well put together and organized. And they're good enough. They're as good as you could hope someone starting a podcast could do. And here, people wondering about starting podcasts are reading up on how much money you can get for 50,000 downloads. And it just struck me. It was like all of this talk about microphones, all of this talk about cameras, all of this talk about advertisers, all this talk about where to market it, all of these things. It's like all you need is a microphone off your cell phone, or a simple lapel mic, or an easy rig you can get off of Amazon for $90. You don't have to pontificate. You don't need the perfect setup. You don't need the perfect sound studio. I'm using GarageBand. You don't need perfect software. What you need is an idea. What you need is execution. And that's something you're not going to find in those articles. And that's why people reading those articles are likely not the people that are ever going to get 1,000 downloads per episode. Because the people that will get 1,000 and 10,000 and 50,000 downloads per episode are people focusing on an idea, focusing on executing. They're not getting some goofy little dopamine rush just thinking about how awesome it would be. And you see this everywhere. You see this in sports. You see this in academics. You see this in people's professional careers. People sit around and think and talk about stuff. And their whole industries built around capturing people's energy around sitting and thinking. Whole books, written volumes. Just look in the financial planning world. You can go pick out 30, 40, 50 books at Barnes & Noble. Well, there's a Barnes & Noble around anywhere. But you can get these books. The vast majority of people will read these and never execute. Because it's easy. When it comes down to it, it's not that hard. Just like podcasting, you could do it on your phone. What it takes is an idea and execution. And you don't get any of that in articles. You don't get any inspiration. The most honest thing I heard when and I did do a little research, when I was researching a podcast, is this woman told me, she didn't tell me, she told whoever was listening on YouTube, and I think she had gone like 50,000 downloads or something last month, so she was a serious woman. She said, look, don't start a podcast unless you have something you can talk about for 100 episodes deep right now. And I thought that was so honest. Because she didn't care about marketing in that moment. She didn't care about downloads. She didn't care about ads. She was being honest with people and saying, you need to have an idea and you need to have the ability to execute 100 times or stop thinking about it right now. And I give her credit for saying that, because the bottom line is the average person reads that or hears that and they stop right away. So when you're thinking about things, if you like thinking about them, if you like planning, if you like geeking out over software or microphones or whatever, good for you. That's awesome. That's awesome. But don't confuse these two things. There's no dopamine rush in slogging through months and months of recordings. There's no dopamine rush in watching your ratings on iTunes slowly creep up. I think I have 20. There's no dopamine rush in realizing that if you want to do it right, it takes years. So if dopamine and excitement and energy are the things you're after, just think about stuff. But if you want real success in the world, let go of that and get ready to execute. I'm Matt Todd, and this is the engine that drives me. Go out and crush it.